Hello again, everyone. It's Mark Christensen here with Sovos Compliance. It's the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. Appreciate again everybody joining our webinar today, Building the Tax Team of the Future to Successfully Navigate the Regulatory Storm. As I said, again, my name is Mark Christensen. I'm a Director of Product Marketing here at Sovos for our Enterprise Sales and Use Tax Solutions. I've been with the company for about 5 years, and my role is really helping the organization understand not only the market, but what trends we're seeing in the market, and really understanding how our solutions create value in the market and for the clients that we work with. And my co-presenter today is Matt Walsh. Matt, you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks, Mark. So Matthew Walsh, Principal for Indirect Tax with Sovos Solutions. I have been with the company now coming up on 18 years. Started on the research side and supplied the tax rules that go into all of our products for a number of years. Now I work closely with Mark with our alliances teams, our sales teams, working closely with our clients, helping them build out the correct solutions for them on a go-forward basis, as well as working with our partners to ensure that we're working together with them to make sure that we are not only solving the needs of today, but solving the needs that are coming down the line for our clients.
Great, thanks, Matt. So as we thought about the topic of this webinar, Building the Tax Team of the Future, one of the things we noticed in the market today is there's been a lot of buzz around this particular topic. If you look at thought leadership that's being put out by other organizations, and a lot of whom that we work with, like the Big Four and PwC, EY, KPMG, you've seen a lot of coverage on this topic of not only what's happening in terms of the regulatory environment today, but really what does that implication mean for tax teams today, and what do tax teams need today to be successful, but then also looking out into the future of really what does the future of the tax team look like, and what are the attributes of the tax team and the technologies of the tax team that they're going to need to really be successful moving forward. And so we thought it'd be great to do a topic on this, or a webinar on this topic from our perspective. And so today we're going to do that, and we're going to borrow some of that great information that we've seen from others, from EY and KPMG and others, so you'll see some of that sprinkled throughout, but certainly get our own flavor and perspective on this as we move through the presentation. So really what we're going to cover today is, as we talk about this storm, really what is this storm that we're talking about? So really laying the context of what's happening in the market today and what does that impact on your organization. And then we're going to talk about the characteristics of the tax professional of the future, and really coming at it from four angles, if you will, or four perspectives. And that is the business acumen of the team, the data analytics and problem solving abilities of the team, the necessity for a global perspective, and then obviously the technology that the team needs to as Matt said, to not only work well today, but also to stay ahead of the regulatory change and the wave that's coming. And then we'll also discuss some actions to improve at the end, and have some time for a few minutes of Q&A as well. Also, as we go through this today, we'll have a few polling questions, so you'll notice those pop up periodically with each of the sections, and we're going to provide a construct, if you will, for you to look at yourself as an individual, if you're a tax practitioner joining us on the call today, or if you're the leader of a tax team, and really helping to evaluate where you are on each one of these four critical attributes as we go through the presentation. So look for that as we move forward. So as we mentioned, we're really talking about this coming storm, and really I wouldn't position it as a coming storm. It's already here, based on the maturity of your organization, and depending where you are in your life cycle, and certainly as a tax group or a tax team, you might be feeling this in different ways. For some of you, it might be a warm breeze and and some spray in the face, and for others, it might be a big tidal wave coming down on you today, depending on where you are as an organization. But we're here to tell you that the wave is coming, and it's getting more intense as it's coming, and it's coming as a result of a few factors. And technology is really the driving factor behind the wave. And there's a couple of elements to this that we're going to cover today. And the first is how technology is disrupting your business. And so as we think about your business and really how technology is impacting your business, I think one of the first things we look at is what does it mean from a standpoint of customer demands. Now, whether you're a retailer, a manufacturer, a software company, whatever you might happen to be, a wholesaler, technology is having a significant impact on your business, and significant from a customer standpoint. When you think about, e-commerce is certainly the easy one to point to in terms of how it is radically shaped people's buying patterns over the last few years, and really forced organizations to change how they think about brick and mortar and tying together an omni-channel customer experience, because customers are now demanding the ability to go online, to find that product, to find the vast product assortment that they want, to price shop. All of those things are creating those unique customer demands that are making it challenging for a retailer. For a manufacturer, it's the same. If you think about your customers, if you manufacture parts, some of the new technologies in terms of injection molding and 3D printing and things that are really changing the dynamic of manufacturing are causing your customers as well to say, hey, you know what? I really want this piece that you offered standard yesterday. Can you customize it this way for me? And by the way, we want it faster and we want it cheaper. And so all those things are working together in terms of how technology is really shaping the business world, which is doing a number of different things relative to, one, driving unique and varied customer demands. In a lot of cases, it's lowering the barrier to entry to competitors, so it's increasing competition as well. If somebody has some great production technology, they might be able to expand into a different market where maybe you play, where they weren't there yesterday. And so we're seeing some of that happening as well. The ability of organizations to grow through easy ways to ship and easy ways to do spot production or contract manufacturing in different countries and really aligning supply chain to the deliverable and to the customer is driving global expansion in a way that we haven't seen in the past as well. And in a lot of cases, that's also driving increased demand for, we need to get on the bandwagon and we need to look at how we're doing things internally and driving some of those business changes from that standpoint as well, right? So how do we really free up resources within the company to invest more in R&D and to invest more potentially in mergers and acquisitions to help us grow quickly and take advantage of some of this market opportunity, which is driving product innovation and obviously rapid change. So as you think about these things, geographic expansion, new product introductions, changing of your supply chain, all of those can have potential impacts on your tax compliance process. This is just one element in terms of what the business drivers are, and there's the whole other element that's really a pivotal key to the storm as well, and that's really what's happening in the regulatory environment. And I'm going to pass it over to Matt to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And as you pointed out, technology, and we all know, is disrupting business. It's also evolving at a rapid pace. And those last two bullets you put, product innovation and rapid change. Those have been areas where governments and particularly tax authorities typically struggle, right? Trying to keep up with the new innovations and how business moves. Generally, on the tax side, the governments could not keep up. One of my favorite examples is there's a particular state, I won't name the state, who up until just a few years ago, their software law still referenced punch cards, magnetic tape, and floppy disks. So I'm not sure who here has actually ever worked with punch cards when they're doing the computer programming. But as you can see, it often takes a long time for tax policy to keep up, and that was sort of what we were used to. But what we're seeing now is governments and the tax authority have shifted and are starting to become much more adaptable and much more aggressive in terms of how they're trying to keep up with these changes. So what we see is, again, in these three buckets, right? You have, a very aggressive culture now within the tax authorities. They are moving much more quickly, and they're moving cross borders. There's concerns around shrinking tax collections, or the tax gap, as it's been known, particularly around digital products and digital trade and e-com trade. There's big concerns around tax avoidance and governments not getting their fair share based on intentional acts by certain businesses or individuals. And there's been a drive for more and more data. So, as we're seeing, on the aggressive side, they're changing their tax laws and their rules, and they're often doing that very quickly. You see changes happen in a matter of months now, with quick timelines versus what used to take years to sort of make its way through the regulatory process. An increased audit frequency and scrutiny. We'll talk more about that as we go, but governments are becoming much more aggressive, much more forceful in their auditing. And then for their documentation and what they require when they do those audits is getting much more detailed and aggressive. Rapid response, and this is also a few things, again, changing their laws much more quickly to keep up, actually being more proactive and trying to understand where industry and business are moving to try and stay ahead of the curve. Using technology such as artificial intelligence and data mining to help them find those folks that they feel maybe are not paying the tax correctly, and doing some of the things like what's called pre-clearance, or you don't get to ship your products until you tell the government you sold something and tell them what the invoice is. So much different, and we're seeing it also as it moves across borders. So again, it used to be very, very tight. One jurisdiction would have all their tax information, but was not open to sharing it, wasn't allowed to share it. But you're seeing that change. You're seeing that change rapidly, right? Some of the examples, particularly on the direct tax side, with the common reporting standards, and country-by-country reporting, are just some examples of how governments have finally realized that to really impact the tax collections and really ensure that they're getting the taxes that are supposed to be paid within their jurisdictions, they need to start sharing information, and we're seeing that happen more and more. I'm going to jump to the next slide, Mark. And here are some trends. So this came out of the World Economic Forum in 2015, and a few bullet points. Tipping points expected to occur by 2021 for some selected technologies. And the two that you see circled at the bottom, number 4 and number 5, there, 30% of corporate audits performed by artificial intelligence. And we're already seeing that. We're seeing that happen outside of the U.S. for sure, where the auditing is done electronically, and the audit is done behind the scenes without perhaps the company knowing it, and the company getting a notice saying, hey, we went through your records and we think you owe this much money and this much penalty and this much interest. The next one is, tax collected via blockchain. And so again, with fraud and with the concerns of nefarious conduct online, governments are looking for ways to validate the data and make sure that they're being paid appropriately. And blockchain, a newer technology, right, is out there for a variety of transactions, and you're starting to see governments move to insist or to allow blockchain transactions for paying your taxes, and that it will certainly improve. The one here I'm not sure I'm going to jump on, Mark, maybe you will, is the first implantable mobile phone. I am not going to implant a mobile phone into myself. I can assure you that.
I'm trying to figure out how to lose my mobile phone, so yeah, I'm with you. It's not in the cards.
What do you do? What if you do? If you crack the screen, or how do you crack the screen on that one? I don't want to. I don't want to find out.
I don't know. I don't want to know.
And as I said, my role here now is to work with our clients, work with our partners, and really get their feedback, get their feelings on where they need support, where their businesses are going. And here are some some quotes that we have captured from some of our clients. Right, the top one on the left. I've been in tax for 30 years and have never seen evolution of tax at this pace ever. Again, that said, I've been doing this for 18 years, and I can wholeheartedly agree. I would say for my first 5, maybe even 10 years here, tax change was sort of a predictable thing. You had your periods, mid-year, quarters, end of the year, things would change. Every once in a while, a government would jump up and do something quickly. But for the most part, it was not the Wild West that we see right now, and it's really starting to change. And actually, that's the comment just below it right now. It is the Wild West because of the amount of change that's happening and how governments are reacting to these technology shifts. You really see on the compliance side a true period where you need to be ahead of the curve and try to stay ahead of the curve, or you're going to quickly fall behind. In the bottom quote there, 45% of CFOs say increasing compliance costs are the #1 barrier to growth. So again, with all these changes, there is a cost of business, and making sure that you are staying ahead of that and being more efficient is going to not only make your lives easier on the compliance side, but help your business grow as well. Okay, Mark.
Yep, right on. And if you're looking at all those quotes, here's really how some of this is beginning to manifest itself, right? So this is some information out of a recent Aberdeen Group market survey that we did of over 500 organizations responded to the survey. And this particular swath of information is particularly for manufacturers, but you can see how some of these trends and what's happening in the market and some of this disruption is manifesting itself in, what we probably all agree is less than stellar performance. So looking at the number of audits have definitely increased, and you probably saw from that previous slide, that about 60% of manufacturers agreed that, they've increased over the past couple of years, and they're going to continue to increase over the next 3 to 5. And so we need to get better at how do we manage that and mitigate some of that audit risk. Days to prepare for an audit. If you're looking at 10 days invested in 30 audits over the last 5 years, you're talking about roughly the equivalency of an FTE there. Average penalties paid when audited, and that's per audit instance. You got another FTE there in terms of an average of 55,000 across the respondents from our survey. And then a couple of other ones quickly. The returns that were 100% accurate over the past 2 years, only 60% of returns were the average of what was accurate over the past 2 years, and then nearly a quarter of all filings were late. And so we're seeing some of what the disruption happening in the marketplace is doing to tax teams, making the job more difficult, dealing with a lot of that rapid change, which we know with a lot of the limited resources that teams have, causes them to can be very reactive, leads to more penalties, more errors, and really limiting that ability to get and stay ahead. So if you're experiencing some similar results to this, you may be feeling the wave coming down on you again. And you might be thinking that, I need a bigger boat. And for those of you who are of the same ilk as Matt and I will get this reference. But really, you don't need a bigger boat. What you really need is a better boat, a better and faster boat, and really a high-performance team to help manage that boat. And we're going to spend the rest of the time this morning and this afternoon really talking about what are those key attributes of this boat and this team that are really going to help accelerate the tax team of the future and help you stay ahead. So, and those 4 really attributes are really business acumen, data analytics and problem solving skills, taking a global perspective, and then having the technology and tools that you need at your fingertips to really get the job done. And you can see this great quote from PwC here as you think about the tax professional of the future. A successful tax pro of the future will be highly proficient in data analysis, statistics, and technology, as well as process improvement and change management. So you can see from the perspective here, given everything that's happening in the regulatory environment and within the business, that it takes a lot more than just the basic tax technical discipline in terms of what's going to really make an effective tax team and a tax pro of the future. And so with that, we'll dive into the first one here, which is business acumen, and I'll turn it back over to you, Matt.
All right, thanks, Mark. And as you talk about that quote, in the being able to manage or deal with change management and process improvement. Again, I've been here for a long time, and back when I first started, tax professionals were known as sort of the steady folks who didn't like change. That I used that same system for 20 years and it's fine. We don't need to change and make any waves. And really that has changed wholesale. And so anybody in the field now is looking forward, is trying to determine the best applications, the best uses of systems, and really looking forward, looking into the future, and not trying to stay with what is working today, but really looking forward to what what's going to help their business grow. And I've noticed that wholesale shift, like I said, probably over the past 8 years. But when it gets to business acumen, again, the tax department, the tax professional needs to understand the business strategy and where the business is going, because they can help drive those goals and help deliver results based on understanding not only what tax rules are, but how then those tax rules will impact that business strategy and help align the business strategy with the tax compliance needs as well. Again, ability to adapt to both business and regulatory changes. As I said, I've been doing this for a long time. I've been, the person responsible for the tracking that regulatory change for many, many years. and the pace at which this has accelerated, I would say in the past 6 years or so, has been incredible, and in the past 4 years has been unbelievable. You know, when I first started here, you could take the summer off, right? After July 1, you had a few months to relax before you had to start gearing up for the January 1 changes, but that doesn't happen anymore. These rules, these changes are happening constantly. They're happening quickly, and you know, there is no sort of off season for the indirect tax folks. I'm sure everybody else on this phone gets that question, you know, January, February, March. Ooh, you must be really busy. It's tax season. And my stock answer, of course, is I'm busy every month. So, but the couple of the regulatory changes with the changes within your business, and again, the tax department needs to understand not only the regulatory piece of that, but also the business changes that are happening outside of their four walls, and understand how those are going to impact business growth. That leads into the next one, right? Working effectively across teams, and not only across teams in the same building, across teams, across countries, right? Across lines of business. Most businesses now have a global footprint, even if they started out, you know, 5 years ago as a domestic business. Because of, you know, the growth in e-com and global trade, many businesses have now become global entities. And so you need to be able to work effectively, exchange that information not only across your team at your home office, across the country, but also across the world. And then also move that between lines of businesses, depending on how your business is structured. You may have different tax colleagues sitting in a different line of business, or at least executive management sitting in another line of business that needs to understand the impacts of their moves with tax regulatory affairs and what tax regulations are going to mean to their business. And then, of course, effectively communicate and influence based on based on what we all know. So being able to understand the business, being able to then quickly adapt to that, being able to work with the teams across various aspects of the company and across the world, but then of course effective communication skills is critical, right? So you may be able to understand where everything's going and understand perfectly how that's going to impact your business, but if you don't have the skills, if the person trying to get that message out there isn't an effective communicator, that can be lost pretty quickly on the business, and really not help the business grow.
Yeah, and it's interesting, even piggybacking onto that, Matt, one of the other things that came out of the Aberdeen research that we did was really a much higher degree of confidence in compliance readiness and ability to handle risk the higher you went up the chain, if you will. So, you know, as Matt says, the ability to work effectively across the organization is critical, especially if you're talking to IT leadership in terms of some tools that you might need, or finance leadership. You know, it's likely that most of you probably roll up in your tax team into finance in some way. But even, you know, as you look at a CFO, in a lot of cases, they might have not a full view of exactly all the risk that the organization has based on some business changes that have come about, or how things are going within the organization. In a lot of cases, their compliance confidence is much higher than the people that are actually involved in it more day to day and really understanding the implications. So in a lot of cases, just that even simple ability to communicate effectively and influence upward within your own group and within your own team is important as well.
Yeah, so during my career here, Mark, we had that, you know, so obviously technical people have a much different approach and thought process than folks who are, you know, used to doing legal research or tax research. And I remember this law came down, and it was an interesting law in what in the tax compliance that they were trying to put in place. And we sat down and explained it to some technical folks who could not comprehend that was actually the law. And it took us about an hour and a half to work through the law, and I actually had to pull it up and go through section by section and explain it to them in more technical terms to get them on board to understand that this was truly the law and this is truly what had to be done. So, you know, you do get people who have different approaches and different ways of thinking about things, and being able to, you know, get that information across to everybody is critical, and critical from the tax department for sure. So this chart, you know, comes from a KPMG study, and it just shows where tax strategy can can help instruct other functional areas and so on. And so, and some of those are you would expect, right? A reorg or an M&A transaction, tax strategy is often very closely involved. Transfer pricing issues and decisions, establishing foreign permanent establishments and subs, financing projects, and then contract negotiations and conclusions are all areas where tax has a big role. And it's interesting. So the third one down, establishing foreign, a PE. There's an OECD report out on what they're calling tax certainty, and a study on tax certainty and issues that around tax that cause business to move or not to move. And so if you go out to the OECD website, I believe that study is up and available for review right now. But they interviewed, I think, about 500 different businesses of different sizes, and where tax comes into play, and then tax uncertainty versus where they have some certainty, and how they decide to make business decisions. So it's something that's very critical, and it's something that governments are looking at. I mean, the OECD is a collection of governments, and trying to create better tax policy. So the OECD funded the study to try and help governments as well, in when they roll out these rules, to think about that and think about how the tax folks are going to see that and how that could impact how business operates within that company, or within that country, excuse me.
Yeah, a couple interesting takeaways for me on this one too, where really looking at the purple on this is how involved the tax team is in these various aspects of the business, and really looking at those ones below the line, like we said, things around really operative changes in the business and product launches and changes to the organizational IT structure, really important and big initiatives where they can have a pretty profound impact from a compliance standpoint for the tax team. And you can see it from the responses here that very few tax teams said that we're very involved in those types of decisions. So I think this really reinforces that need to again build those cross-functional relationships and certainly have not only awareness of what's going on in the business, but as a tax leader, for those of you who are tax leaders on the team, cultivating and building those relationships with your peers across the business so that you do have a seat at the table as some of these decisions are being made.
Exactly.
And then we also wanted to share this. So this was another really interesting insight from EY. So, I think as you think about the things that Matt was talking about around the business acumen being really a critical component of the tax pro of the future, in understanding the tax pro of today also, and what a critical, given the environment that we're in, what a critical those skills are. As you think about the next generation of tax pros coming up, there's some really interesting takeaways, I think, from this infographic here. And this really plots out, the age of potential employees and really how, the generations have shaped how people think and how they're a little bit different all the way from, the baby boomers to Gen X and then now to the millennials. And, so as a leader of a tax team, one of the things to really be thinking about here is, as you start thinking about those coming out of school or those who are younger in their career, who are going to be the members of your tax team in the future, and probably the ones that you're going to bring in and hire as you expand your group or maybe expand operations, if you will. They think very differently in terms of these new tax pros coming up. So a couple of key attributes I thought was worth highlighting here was the predisposition to think and work globally in terms of the younger group coming through, and those especially that have just graduated or been through the university system. Many of them have studied abroad. Many of them have traveled abroad and really have a more global view in terms of, and a lot of that has been fed by social media and access to information, and people have visibility to things going on everywhere in the world today that they never did before. And that reinforces the second point of these folks are all digital natives. They have a certain expectation around how to use technology, how to gather information, how to disseminate information. They prefer emails and text messaging really to face-to-face. And so those are some things you have to think about in terms of these folks coming in are going to have a certain expectation around the work environment, what types of tools they use, and if you've got, a process today that's, very manual, error-prone, lots of touches, you need to think about that in terms of being able to recruit this next generation and then also retain them once you have them in the door. And then another couple of attributes I thought were really interesting was the predilection of millennials to question authority, needing explanation. So again, as you think about, Matt's really, spoken a lot about how quickly things are changing and that need to rapidly adapt. And so bringing some of these types of new folks coming in and plugging them in and saying, here's our process and here's how we do things, this is how we've always done things, is probably not going to be the best approach, because these folks are going to come in and they're going to question why we're doing things this way. They're going to want to understand, and they're going to really want to know the why behind why things are done. And they're ambitious, and they search for meaning in their work. So they're the types of folks that, and these are all good attributes, because these are the kind of things that you want, people that are adaptable to change and that really are driving change and saying, okay, I'm looking at what's going on here, and I feel like there's some better ways that we can do this. And they're going to push on those types of things because they want to feel value in their work, they want to feel they're moving things forward, and they're going to have a predisposition to wanting to make positive change in the organization. And so those are some things to think about, again, as you think about how you're structured today and how your processes and your tools work today. As you think about that next generation coming in, some things to keep in mind in terms of what's going to be attractive to them, again, not only in bringing them into the organization, but also then retaining them and keeping them, which is what we all want, and hopefully seeing them advance in their career within the organization. And then we'll bookend this section really with this quote from Jane McCormick, which I think, again, just summarizes what we've been talking about, which is, again, with these global trends towards increased transparency, and everything from a regulatory environment is really driving toward, we want full tax transparency. There really is a need for professionals to be exceptional communicators within the organization, and then brand ambassadors, and not just brand ambassadors like for the organization externally, but also internally for the tax team. And that goes to that ability to influence, to helping others in the organization recognize the decisions that they make and how they might impact the organization from a tax perspective, and how that may create unnecessary risk for the organization. Whereas if we're more included and better communication is happening up front, we can mitigate some of that. So those very important attributes, and that business acumen being that critical first attribute. So here's our first polling question. So what we'd like to do as we go through this, we're going to, at the end of each section, we're going to have you rate yourselves on these four attributes. And you can see here we've got this scale, which we've kind of modeled on one end a reactive mode on a 1 to 5 scale, with 1 being on the far left reactive and 5 on the far right being more proactive, and a 5-point scale there. And then you can see, giving some examples of, on the reactive side, if you're an individual attending the webinar today, thinking maybe about yourself and your performance within your team, hopefully you can have some takeaways from this in terms of areas that you can maybe improve on, or that, evaluating yourself and saying, hey, I'm really, doing a good job here and maybe ahead of the curve. But on the reactive side, we're looking at things like, the tax team really isn't involved and is the last to know about changes. And as a tax leader, maybe look at this through the lens of your team. Works with others reactively only when needed, focuses on tactics. And then on the proactive end, the team is aware and involved in business strategy, works proactively and effectively with other business leaders, is engaged in process improvement, and then the flavors of that in between. So we'll go ahead and launch that survey, and on a scale of 1 to 5 here, rate yourself or your team as it may be, and then keep track of that score as we go through, because we'll add them all up at the end, and then we'll talk about that a little bit. So we'll give you a few seconds here to finish that. All right. Responses are coming in. And we're going to share those quickly, so hopefully everybody got a chance to get answer. So seeing a lot in the middle range, and looks like preponderance are in the 3 to 4 range. So yeah, that's great, and that's probably anticipated, right, Matt?
Yeah, I think folks who are going to tune into a topic like this are those who are looking and probably already doing these things internally, and maybe ahead of the curve over some others. So that's great. And obviously always room to be more proactive, but I think some good results right now for today. So why don't we jump into the next section, Mark? All right. And the next, area of focus is, data analytics and problem solving. And so, like I said, there's been an evolution, particularly in the tax group, and sort of a tax-focused team or task-focused team. Getting those returns out, making sure that orders are paid, to being more of an analytical team. And so, yeah, those things still need to be done, right? You need to make sure that those tax filings are done on time. Make sure that if a PO comes in and there's a question on the tax, that is addressed. But that's becoming less and less the focus of the team, and those things are more opt for automation. What the tax team really needs to do is start looking at data and data analytics and big data and trying to figure out how to use that information that they have to really help drive the business forward. And the indirect tax team has, a unique position in the business in that they have really detailed transactional data, data that no other group within the organization has, and that amount of data can really be powerful in terms of, helping steer decisions, helping drive the organization forward. The problem is people need to be able to understand what that data means and be able to use it. There's some interesting facts about data I got from a Forbes magazine article. There's between 2010 and 2020, they expect the amount of data to double every 2 years. This article came out in 2015. It said that more data had been created in the past 2 years than in the entire previous history of the human race. An amazing amount of data. For a Fortune 1000 company, a 10% increase in data accessibility will result in more than $65 million in additional net income. So a lot of powerful information, but this one actually really struck me was that less than 0.5% of all data is ever actually analyzed and used. So we're beginning to capture all this information. We're beginning to have all this data at our fingertips. But now the tax professional really needs to be able to mine that data to understand what's in there and become an analyst of that data and help drive the business. So, again, having that data-driven mindset and seeing themselves as a role of a data analyst, a tax analyst, needing, having the ability to access it, organize it, and combine it all, and then manipulate that data into usable information, and using it, and manipulating it for different purposes, for different audiences, right? So you may want some very, very detailed reports for the purchasing team, but higher level reports or even graphs and charts for your, the executive team, the CFO and the CEO, and being able to give the appropriate message and the appropriate information in the appropriate format based on the data that you're analyzing. Not only just having all that data, but being able to, create some insights in that and create some key performance indicators to help measure, and improve how the tax team is moving, but also how the business is moving. Right? Again, the indirect tax team has really detailed transactional data, again, that no one else in the company has access to, and the amount of information that you can really pull from that data is very powerful and very, very beneficial to the organization, as long as the folks can understand it and then provide that to the rest of the organization. Use that data to become proactive and focus on opportunities and risks. As you mine that data and start looking at what's going on, do you see areas where there's always a problem? Do you see perhaps a jurisdiction, a country, a state where your vendors are always getting it wrong for you, or you're always having issues in terms of how you're complying with the rules in that jurisdiction, and being able to then take that information and decide how can we make changes internally in order to make that an opportunity. Maybe we see some area in the world where our processes are very, very valuable and have been creating great sales, but we didn't see that until we were able to analyze the data that we had internally. And then also being able to, once you have the data, figure out ways to measure the improvement that's coming from that information. And is it actually improving the business, or should you make more tweaks, more changes, and decide on different approaches to the information you're getting to really help drive that business forward?
Okay, yeah, and the one point at the bottom here was really interesting, where it mentions only about 55% in our Aberdeen survey of respondents had established KPIs for their tax compliance process. So definitely lots of room for improvement there.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And again, we'll finish up the section with some quotes that we pulled from various resources. The linchpin for real transformation is data. How data issues are solved will shape process change, which in turn will drive the resource model and the opportunities for value-added activities and contribute more strategically to the business. And again, so you're seeing that the tax function and the indirect tax function in particular is really being viewed now as a strategic organization, and not just they're the tax guys and they make sure we don't get sued or audited, right? The ability to analyze data in real time has significant impact on the business performance. And if you think back to that fact, right? So, Fortune 1000 company, a 10% increase in data accessibility can result in $65 million in additional net income. That's a large amount of money, right? And that is the potential for being able to actually understand this data and understand it in real time and help the business grow. And then the last one, again, if tax execs can obtain tax-ready information, they'll be able to devote their time to strategic tax analysis. And again, getting away from that day-to-day, making sure that the Massachusetts sales tax return is filed on time, but look at the big picture and really help drive that organization forward. And that's what the tax, professional needs to be now and going forward.
Yeah, and I was intrigued by that concept of tax-ready information as well. So I think it reinforces a couple of points we've talked about earlier about really, again, understanding that broader picture of what's happening in the business and the regulatory environment. If you understand where your business is going, like if you are going to be entering a new jurisdiction, or maybe you're going to be going global, or you're going to be launching some new products, whatever it might happen to be, the more you understand what's happening in the regulatory environment, and you can shape from an IT perspective the data that you're gathering on those transactions and how it is how you're capturing the data, and then how you're able to report on that data. So it comes to you in a tax-ready format where you've got all the transactional level detail that you need to be able to do correct analysis, to provide for audit defense, et cetera. You'll be way ahead of the game. And so that's one of those examples, again, of working across the organization, thinking about the data that you need to do your job well and the analysis that you need, and then working with others to make sure that you get that data in a tax-ready way.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, on the indirect tax side, they have the most data of anybody in the company. So they are the ones who are able to really provide that information. All right, so let's look at the next question, the next rating. So how would you rate yourself? Again, same on the 1 to 5 scale, 1 being proactive, or 5 being proactive, 1 being reactive. Take a look and see how you rate yourself. From the reactive side, siloed data viewed as data as a means to an end, right? No established KPIs, difficulty supporting audit defense, execute the process. You just stay in the lane. You don't look outside of that. Versus, your systems and processes provide tax-ready data. A holistic view of data as the foundation of compliance and audit. Established KPIs to measure and monitor. Time spent monitoring risk and doing proactive planning audits. Tools to easily work with the data. And empowered to drive positive changes. Right? So, again, take a minute here to rate your teams, rate your organization, and see where you fall on the scale.
Yep, and this one, it looks like we're coming in with a little bit different distribution here, and maybe a little bit more opportunity in this one with 50% putting yourselves right in that mid-range around 3 and or 2. So definitely a lot of opportunity for improvement here across probably many organizations, and we see this a lot as well.
again, and not surprising, right? This is, I think of all the areas, this is probably the one that people are really, over the past couple of years, starting to struggle with, right? The amount of data that just floods into a business, into the tax department is just massive, and it gets more and more expensive every day, and it's coming in faster and faster. So I could see people having it, not quite at the level they want to be at yet, working their way there, but really trying to struggle with information overload is one of the old terms that people used to use.
Yep. Right on. So that's where, yeah, having some of those tools to work with the data definitely is a must for the tax team of the future. So moving on, we'll hit the third point here around global perspective. So as you think about some of the things we've already talked about today, the technology is just continuing to create opportunities, one for business like never before, but again, as we've talked about, is creating opportunities for the regulators as well to up their game. And we're seeing this happen, holistically, not just in the United States, but globally. And this is really the biggest trend I think that everybody needs to pay attention to in terms of how you think about equipping your team for the future. Really, the governments, as we see, are really driving toward wanting detailed transactional information. They want that information. They want to be able to match an audit on that transaction level detail. They want to look at tax types. They want to look at taxpayers. They want to look at across various jurisdictions, and in most cases, they want to do it in real time. And that's really the where things are going. And as Matt said earlier in that stat that we showed earlier of the audits being performed by AI, they're implementing new technologies with artificial intelligence to be able to do some of that matching. Audits are really going to be performed by intelligent machines more and more and more in the future as this technology continues to be evolved and developed. Brazil and South America has been leading the way in this as they've really implemented a number of technology initiatives. Pre-clearance, as Matt talked about earlier, really having organizations send in their transaction level detail and having it analyzed before they can even ship product. We're starting to see some of this across the 10,000 jurisdictions in the U.S., where states are beginning to work together to share audit information on various organizations across different states. There's 20 plus states that are working together and sharing information so that they can do some joint auditing on transfer pricing issues that many of you might be aware of. And so we're starting to see a lot of this data sharing and data mining happening across various types of regulatory organizations. And right now there's 24 countries currently that require electronic submission of transactional level tax data. And it's all driving toward standardizing of data, standardizing of formats, standardizing of processes, and really going to that ultimate vision of complete tax transparency. And really ultimately where you can see it going is there will come a day when it's basically, just send us your transaction level data and we'll tell you what you owe without needing to fill out any kind of a tax form. And that's really where it's going. And so that's really the important thing from a global perspective is for tax teams to think about what's happening globally and how might some of these other regimes that are being put in place globally impact what I'm doing today. Because they may not be impacting us immediately in some of these in the U.S. today, but they are coming. And I think you guys see it every day. We see it every day. The jurisdictions watch what each other are doing. And when they see a good idea, they adopt it, and they're all investing as well. So when you think about it really as from your team and how they can be successful moving forward, it really is having that global mindset. You still need to have that local expertise, but hopefully the team is coming up for air. And again, you got some of those more strategic thinkers that are able to get up and look at the business and look at what's happening more globally within tax regimes and where things are going. And how are we managing that data today? Having the systems and processes in place to expand globally with minimal risk and be able to adapt. Centralizing those processes and oversight and leveraging those best practices, again, as Matt said, across the organization, not just within our division or within our footprint or within our compliance obligation, but how do we centralize as much of that as possible so we have that control and oversight, but still have that local flexibility to implement as needed. And then having, again, some of that flexibility and foresight to be able to prepare as you move forward. And a lot of that is very difficult, right? Because what we see in a lot of cases is the life cycle of the various organizations that we work with. they grow up, where you start with maybe one single entity, you've got very limited reporting obligations. Then you grow and you start distributing product in different areas and selling, and maybe you've got the various suppliers in different states. And all of a sudden you've got more obligations, and they begin to compound. Then you spread out and you open a couple of new offices, or maybe through M&A develop some different business units, if you will. More complex obligations. And then all of a sudden, you start to look at your technology infrastructure as well. It's like, oh, we got 3 different business units here. We're all running different platforms. We've all got different tools and technologies, which makes it really difficult, right, to be somewhat strategic about how you pull these things together and how you adapt. But those are all parts of the puzzle that need to be brought into consideration. And then ultimately, in a lot of cases, it ends up looking like this. Where you're spread across the globe, you've got various business units and entities, you've got a ton of different types of reporting obligations in many, many jurisdictions, lots of different technologies, and you've kind of got this patchwork of a mess of technologies that you're working with that makes the job really, really difficult. And so having that global view, especially if you're going to take a step back and really take a strategic approach to how you want to think about satisfying and viewing the regulatory environment, satisfying those obligations, what technology infrastructure you have and the tools that you have to be able to centralize some of that and make it more adaptable and proactive so that you can begin to stay ahead of some of that regulatory change is really critical. So you end up with something a little bit more like this, where you really have a cohesive, interconnected tax process across your global organization. And visibility to where all those compliance obligations are going. Because if you can satisfy the most complex ones, you can satisfy the easiest ones and everything in between. And so this global perspective is really a critical one.
Exactly. You can back up one slide, Mark. Sorry.
You got it.
One more. So for this slide, it's interesting. And forward one.
That?
Yeah. So as you do expand globally, and also, so you think about your compliance around the world, but also think about where the changes are coming from. So as Mark pointed out, with e-invoicing and fiscal reporting and real-time tax data coming out of Latin America, right? That really was driven out of Brazil, right? And people would not have seen Brazil as a cutting edge, forward-thinking country, but they came up with this cutting-edge idea, and it spread like wildfire. So as you go forward, think about areas of the world that you're moving into, and that some of the more cutting-edge changes for tax will come out of those areas, like Africa, Latin America, Eastern Europe, where they don't have those set processes in place already, and they're much more able to adapt to new technologies, and will require businesses to adapt much more quickly as well. So it's very interesting to watch, and I would say certainly watch Africa and Latin America for more of those types of changes.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, and we're seeing that e-audit, beginning to spread now throughout Europe, starting with Spain and beginning to spread beyond that. So again, just to wrap this section up with another quote here, too often tax functions rely heavily on individual teams from multiple jurisdictions. And again, this concept of working independently and focusing on their own in-country operations, where the preferred method would really be to work with a more global view, because what happens usually is, you're focused in one area. In a lot of cases, you got manual processes, very little standardization, and even less technology, and that's makes it more difficult to grow and adapt as the business changes and the regulatory environment changes. So we'll hit our third poll here. So on this attribute, in terms of having a global view, how would you rate yourself and your team? So same scale here, same attributes. You can see a few of the descriptions here on how we would look at reactive, where teams are working more independently. There's various inconsistent processes, local knowledge centers with a limited view versus having a more global mindset. And think of global more as across the organization. It doesn't necessarily have to be, if your organization is just operates in the U.S. today, but maybe it is having a global view of the U.S. versus the few states that you're operating in. Or if you're international and truly multinational, think of it in that way. But do you have the tools you need to easily adapt for rapid growth and the flexibility for those multi-jurisdictional requirements? So we'll see how this one comes in here. Looks like it's coming in very evenly distributed across the middle. So a few folks feel like they're doing very well at it, but again, most in the middle, and looks like a lot in that 3 range, and certainly areas for improvement.
Yeah.
You want
and
to
again,
throw
not
that
a
quick,
surprise,
Brian?
Mark. I think.
There we go.
I think that again, this is again a new concept for folks trying to get outside of their specific region and really expanding and getting that global view. So again, not surprising. So getting better, but definitely some room for improvement.
All right, Matt, bring us home.
All right. So the last area, is the ability to utilize technology and use technology to your advantage and to the tax department's advantage, right? So, what we're looking at, what we see is, there's a need now for agile infrastructure, right? I mean, back in the day, you could buy a room full of servers and set up your systems and let it run and not have to worry about those changes because it was pretty static. But that's not the case anymore. So you need to be able to have that infrastructure that's able to grow, able to change quickly, to manage the rapid change, but also manage that growing amount of data and the growing needs and changes within the tax department for the data that they're requiring and the information that they're going to need to mine from that. Let's talk about global capabilities so that your systems are not siloed, that they are actually helping you around the world and wherever your business has its footprint or where that business is going to expand in the near future. But also having it on a centralized platform so that you have all that information, you have all that data available in one area and instead of trying to combine it all together through various systems and various requests from various IT people and other finance departments, having that centralized onto one platform with a singular transactional database is critical. Having new tools and end-to-end processes in place to help automate the workflow and help automate, again, those day-to-day tasks so that the tax folks are now focusing on the more strategic aspects and analyzing the information that they do have instead of just trying to get those tax returns filed and out the door. And then having those ability to report and show the analytics to the executives, being able to set up performance indicators and being able to have that information quickly and readily available for both management reporting and for audit defense. As Mark pointed out, there's a move now, and we're seeing this more so outside the U.S., where companies are being audited and just sent a letter just based on the data that they have. So being able to have that information, that data quickly and at your hands will allow you to quickly address those questions and issues as they come up. And again, that last bullet there, in the manufacturing space, they saw an average of reduction of 50 hours per employee dedicated to technology infrastructure, maintenance and updates with automated indirect tax compliance systems. So it's a huge amount of time saving just for the IT folks. And the other question we asked was, what about shared services centers? And what we're seeing now is, this came from KPMG, about 40% of businesses have a shared services center for at least some of their routine functions. So we're not quite at half, but what we're seeing is that this is a large increase, a 60% increase from just 2 years ago. And really what that is saying is that businesses are starting to realize that tax data, that information does need to be centralized, needs to be managed by one group, and that they are making strides to move that way. And again, we're seeing that, again, change drastically year over year. So something that's interesting and something that we see as a trend moving forward is that tax group is really a centralized group. All right, for our last polling question, so same thing for technology, how would you rate yourself and your team? So on the 1 to 5 scale again, reactive being little centralization, single purpose point, solutions, patchwork of technologies and manual processes, no unified sources of data and limited analytics tools, versus the proactive side where you have centralized control, a single data warehouse, solutions with workflow design for end-to-end management, local and international capabilities, and full reporting and analytics. I'll give you a couple seconds to answer that.
Yep, and as you're doing that, we recognize we're running right up against the hour. We're in the home stretch here, so just a few more minutes if you can hang with us, hopefully. So this one, yeah, similar, in the middle distribution. So I think, yeah, we see this a lot as we work with the organizations that we work with that In a lot of cases, there is this mix of technologies. In some cases, which can be very different by division or even within a individual business unit. There might be good automation of certain processes, manual workflows and other processes, certain transaction types that are automated and others that are not. So to see this distribution of kind of twos and threes in the preponderance of the answers here on the technology is not surprising. All right, so how did you do? So overall, we asked at the beginning that if you keep track of your responses, I think just loosely as I've kept track here, I think for the first attribute we had mostly 4s, and I think it's for the most part we've had 3s for the next 3 that we did. So if we add those up, we'd have around 11, I think, as an average for most of you on the call. Some better, and some still working to improve. So that puts most of you, somewhere in the middle here, in our standard bell curve. And again, this is not surprising. So, as we talk to most tax teams are on a journey here where they are somewhere in the middle, trying to raise their game. I think if we're in a situation where you're less than 5, then definitely, hopefully, you'll take some things away from this webinar today in terms of what's happening and be able to identify some areas for improvement. And we'll have a couple of suggestions on that in just a second here. And also be sending everybody in the follow-up a little bit more detailed tool where you can break down each one of these individual attributes and rate yourself as well, and then use that as a tool to do some planning potentially on some areas of improvement, and you'll get that in the follow-up to the webinar afterwards. All right, given that we're running a little bit long, we don't have a ton of time to dive into these, but I think we had a couple of actions in here. So I think as you think about the Tax Pro of the future, again, and from a leadership standpoint, if you're leading a tax team, just some things to think about here in terms of your team health and performance, and certainly if you're an individual contributor as well in a tax team, hopefully there's been some takeaways as well today on some things that you can start thinking about and paying attention to. But I think from a tax team perspective, really having that organizational vision for your team and really what are the principles guiding your team and your role and function within the organization. And so that you've got that really critical piece of clarity of purpose and alignment of goals across the team and really what's most important to focus on. As you think about that next generation coming in, developing that persona, if you will, of what is the ideal tax team profile of the people that you want to have on your team. Or, if you're an individual, if you think about what does that ideal tax team member profile look like, and where are areas that you can maybe improve to get there if you don't feel like you're there. And obviously, everybody on the call, and myself included, have areas that they can be doing better in terms of personal development. So there's some areas there to think about and focus on. And then I'm going to share a book in just a second too that can help with a framework if you don't have one. For how to think about some of this, and if nothing else, hopefully everybody can take away just from a measurement standpoint to establish some KPIs for your organization. Again, as we showed earlier, about only 50% of organizations are utilizing established KPIs today. If nothing else, start measuring what you're doing so that you can understand what areas you need to improve. And Matt, anything you want to finish with on the technology side?
Yeah, just quick, we talked about it, and again, we're over time, but, just make sure that, you're centralizing your tax data in an area where you can have all that information at your fingertips and be able to create the reports and the analytics that will really help drive your business forward. And when you look at technology, make sure that it's technology that can change and be updated rapidly with these changes, because you're going to see these changes roll out even more quickly in the future. So, I think let's move on, Mark, and folks can read the individual bullets when we send them the deck.
You betcha. And I think we'll end with this is the book I mentioned. So if you don't have a framework for how to think about how to really create alignment and clarity for your team or your organization, we really recommend this book. We use it here at Sovos. It's The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. There's a brief video overview attached to this, so it's really one of those great simple frameworks that can help you think through how to really create clarity of vision for where we're going. What do we do as a team or as an organization? How do we succeed, and how do we establish really clear priorities that you can share across the organization to help drive some of that organizational alignment and hopefully help get the tax team more involved in what's happening in the business if that's a gap for you today. So I recommend that. And I think I see there's a few of you still left online, so we can maybe take a couple of minutes here for questions before we wrap. But definitely want to just highlight a couple of things here on how to stay informed. So we do have a regulatory feed where we post the most up-to-date state and country regulatory changes. So if you're not subscribing to that, you'll get a link here in the presentation afterwards. Definitely sign up for that. Really timely, great information to help you stay up to date on regulatory changes as they're happening. Subscribe to our Intelligent Compliance blog. You can stay up to date on some of these trends and what's happening. And again, we'll also distribute a blog on this particular topic with that poll worksheet that can help you to, again, analyze your team and where you are on some of these attributes that we've been talking about today. And certainly follow us on LinkedIn if you're able as well. All right. And we'll just give it 1 second here for questions. If anybody has any questions, you can fill in that question tab on your control panel there. All right. I'm not seeing any questions. So hopefully we covered everything pretty well. Hopefully we've given everybody a lot to think about today. As you also, take this away, the resources that we referenced as part of the presentation today are all going to be referenced in the follow-up. So if you're interested in learning more about reading any of those articles that helped contribute to the content here today, those will be provided. And again, appreciate everybody taking the time to join us on the webinar.